Okay, let's go.
Village beauty, renowned throughout 10 miles and 8 villages, was unfortunately kidnapped by a gang of vicious thugs. It seemed the young girl was about to endure a series of humiliations, but just at that moment, a knight clad entirely in black armor appeared in the distance. The bandits, realizing their wicked plans had been interrupted, glared at the newcomer with a mix of ferocity in their eyes. As her blood flowed steadily toward the night, the power of darkness grew even denser in that moment. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Mark slipped into a hallucination once again. Strange, flickering images danced before his eyes. This wasn't the first time he'd experienced such bizarre dreams. Whenever danger loomed, this uncanny ability would surface unbidden. It was precisely this innate gift of prophecy that had allowed Mark to crack numerous cases that seemed unsolvable. And now, another murder had occurred, and the one tasked with investigating it was none other than the renowned Earl Charlie. Mark had been hoping for a chance to meet him, but he didn't expect his prophetic powers to kick in at that very moment. As fragmented scenes flashed through his mind, Mark scribbled down short phrases on paper. Though the episode didn't last long, the key clues to the crime were already sketched out. After confirming Mark was fine, Earl Charlie immediately began deducing the case. Mark, meanwhile, reviewed the notes he'd just written. After carefully studying the phrases, he interrupted the two investigators mid-discussion, declaring that the killer was inside the manor. Earl Charlie took the paper Mark had written on and examined it. The words Manda and crime of passion were scrawled there. According to the sheriff's introduction, Manda was the manor's groom, a seemingly honest, hard-working man. Earl Charlie searched Manda thoroughly, yanking a pendant from his neck and comparing it to the body. The mark on the victim's palm matched the pendant's shape perfectly. Everything pointed to the groom as the murderer. With his crime exposed beyond denial, Manda confessed everything. Though Earl Charlie was thrilled at solving the case, what truly excited him was Mark himself. Mark's extraordinary ability was exactly what Charlie needed to crack a particularly mysterious murder. At Charlie's enthusiastic invitation, Mark became his sole assistant. Unbeknownst to Mark, their destination was a small town miles away, the very place he often saw in his dreams. After 3 days and nights of grueling travel, the two finally reached the outskirts of the town. Mark had hoped to enjoy the view outside the window, but instead he spotted a young, beautiful woman galloping alone through the wheat fields on horseback. Somewhere deep inside, Mark felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if he'd seen her before. When the weary travelers finally arrived in the town, the local sheriff and a group of people were already waiting for them at the village entrance. Earl Charlie wasted no time with pleasantries and headed straight to the victim's grave, intent on exhuming her for a fresh autopsy. Before coming here, he'd thoroughly researched the town. It was steeped in an ancient legend about a black-armored knight who appeared on the outskirts every so often. And every time this knight appeared, a young, beautiful woman would die, her blood completely drained from her body. When Earl Charlie took out a massive pair of iron tongs and pried open the victim's chest, what he found inside was exactly as he'd predicted. All her internal organs were intact, but her blood seemed to have been sucked dry by something. As Earl Charlie explained his findings in detail, Mark, unable to stomach it any longer, hurriedly stood up and stepped outside to get some fresh air. But the moment cold water splashed onto his face, Mark was hit with another wave of eerie visions. This time, however, the victim wasn't someone else. It was himself. When the heavy coffin lid was lifted, he clearly saw Earl Charlie reaching toward his chest with those terrifying tongs. Not only that, but the stunning girl from his dreams was standing beside Charlie as well. When Mark snapped out of the vision, he realized the person in front of him wasn't an illusion. It turned out a beautiful woman had found him collapsed by the river and brought him back to care for him. Her name was Katusha, the legitimate wife of Count Dracula. To fulfill their duties as hosts, Dracula even invited Mark to stay for dinner. But this lavish banquet was far from simple. It was a deliberate attempt by Count Dracula to provoke Mark. Feeling the awkward tension, Mark excused himself, claiming he had urgent business, and left the castle. He planned to head back and check in with Earl Charlie. Yet, on his way back, something unexpected happened. Mark immediately yanked the reins to flee, But before he could get 300 meters, he was struck down by a massive windmill. Just then, a seductive woman appeared before him. Mark scrambled to his feet in a panic and warned her about the Death Knight lurking nearby. She glanced around skeptically, thinking Mark might be unhinged. Then she invited him to her home. To his utter shock, the home she spoke of turned out to be an empty clearing by the river. Curious, Mark asked why she lived there. The woman replied that she was the farmer's daughter and had been living there alone for 30 years, now desperately in need of a strong young man's companionship. Before Mark could fully grasp her words, he felt his head spin, his body overtaken by a rising heat. It dawned on him then. He'd been drugged with something potent in the drink she'd given him. When Mark awoke from his stupor, he found himself back in his inn bed. Thinking it might all have been a dream, he noticed the mud from the riverbed caked on his feet. Sensing something was seriously off, he rushed to tell Charlie everything. But as Mark recounted the passionate tale, Charlie assumed he was bragging and insisted on verifying the story for himself. When the group arrived at the farm from the previous night, they found the mill in ruins, nothing like the scene Mark had described. Mark was completely dumbfounded, unsure of what was happening. Just then, one of their companions spotted a black coat nearby. Mark's eyes lit up. It was the very one he'd lost the night before. A companion quickly asked if the woman's name was Natasha. When Mark confirmed it, the man removed his hat in mourning. 30 years ago, there had indeed been a prosperous farm here, and the farmer's daughter was named Natasha. But due to a bizarre incident, the young Natasha had drowned in the river. The group was stunned speechless. As the situation grew increasingly strange, another bizarre event unfolded that very night. Exhausted from the day, Mark had just drifted into a deep sleep when he suddenly found himself in a dim, shadowy space. It turned out that the one who had brought him here was none other than the deceased Natasha. But she wasn't trying to harm Mark. She needed his help. Natasha had sensed that an evil witch had infiltrated the world of their spirits and was slowly devouring her essence. If the witch was allowed to continue, Natasha would face complete annihilation. To save the beautiful soul before him, Mark had no choice but to steel himself and dive into the embrace of a group of lovely spirits. With one glance, he spotted the witch's shadowy figure. Mark was jolted awake by the crowing of a rooster at dawn. Could it have just been a nightmare? As he reached for a sip of water, he noticed once again that his feet were caked with mud. Sensing things weren't so simple, Mark brought Earl Charlie back to the dilapidated farm, hoping to uncover some clues. But just as Charlie was urging him to trust in science, he suddenly noticed something odd in the distance. Realizing the situation had spiraled far beyond their control, they raced back to the town without delay, intent on reporting this to headquarters. But then, by chance, they spotted the innkeeper. Her left side was missing her right arm. Mark moved to pursue her with questions, but she turned and fled.
Влез куда не надо.
After a thorough search of the innkeeper's home, the group confirmed her identity through peculiar bottles and jars. She was the evil witch hiding in the town. Earl Charlie also found a strange inscription, a symbol unique to the Death Knight. As the chilling winds of a full moon night swept across the land, an uninvited guest arrived at the morgue. His purpose? To resurrect the long disfigured innkeeper. As his most devout follower, she was naturally entitled to the gift of rebirth. With a gentle sweep of his hand over her collapsed face, a thick shroud of dark power enveloped her. The innkeeper regained her youthful beauty. But when she turned and saw her savior was none other than the legendary Death Knight, she shouted furiously, demanding he avenge her. The Death Knight pressed his palm against her once more. A piercing wail tore through the night sky, and the innkeeper was gone for good. Meanwhile, Mark jolted awake, startled by something. After a night of burning, the fire left behind only a ring of scorched earth. Having lost his employer, Mark initially planned to leave the town, but on second thought, he couldn't accept it. Not only had the girl's murder case gone unsolved, but now Earl Charlie's life had been taken too. By all accounts, he shouldn't run away. To rid the town of its dark forces once and for all, Mark made a tough call. He would stay and fight the Death Knight to the end. But first, he had a critical task: recruiting allies. The first hero he set his sights on was a blacksmith with an extraordinary talent for painting. Though it was unclear just how strong he was, rumors claimed that in his youth, He had once fought a demon. Driven by curiosity, Mark came to visit him and earnestly pleaded for him to join the fight. But to his surprise, the bearded man showed no interest at all. Instead, he urged Mark to leave this troubled place as soon as possible. Just then, the man's precious daughter stepped out of the house. When Mark saw the innocent girl, he immediately found the leverage he needed to sway the bearded man. The Death Knight targeted young girls exclusively. If he didn't want his daughter to fall victim too, he'd have to take the initiative and eliminate the threat. Meanwhile, Lisa, a village girl, was washing clothes by the river. As she glanced into the water, a terrifying figure appeared in the reflection. The sight sent a chill down Lisa's spine. She knew this person all too well. It was her cruel stepmother, who had died of fright. Just last night, her stepmother had been secretly meeting with an old lover. But then, a sudden urgent knock came at the door. Startled and guilt-ridden, the stepmother went to check, only to find no one there, just a red coat lying on the ground. She was about to tell her lover about it when they both turned at a noise behind them. By the time people found her, she was already dead. To uncover the true cause of her death, the lover, as the prime suspect, was taken into custody. But when Mark and the others interrogated him, the man's mind had already shattered from the previous night's ordeal, leaving him a raving madman. Luckily, the bearded man, having come around, arrived just in time. With a single glance, he spotted something suspicious on the wall. After wiping it down with a wet rag, strange symbols emerged. Everyone gasped. These were the unmistakable runes tied to the Death Knight, and it wasn't the first time they'd seen them. At that moment, Mark's prophetic senses kicked in again. As horrifying images flashed through his mind, his pen danced furiously across the paper. This time, though, what he saw was chaotic and disjointed, and even his drawings were cryptic and hard to decipher. He wasn't sure what the heart-shaped ancient tree meant, but he ordered everyone to search the stepmother's house, convinced it hid a dark secret. He'd noticed something crucial. The two Death Knight symbols were different. The latter was clearly a forgery. From this, Mark deduced the killer had to be the stepmother's husband, and he was right. His assistant not only found the murder weapon, but also uncovered the red coat and a strange candle. With witnesses and evidence in hand, the man had no chance of denying it, yet something still nagged at Mark. Even though the murderer was caught, something felt off. When he idly picked up the candle to examine it, a flood of terrifying visions surged into his mind. This time he saw the Death Knight himself. Could this murder be connected to him after all? To test his hunch, Mark rushed to the coroner to re-examine the body. The results confirmed his suspicions. The stepmother hadn't been stabbed to death. She'd been scared to death by something. At the same time, her daughter was suddenly woken by a voice calling out. At the same time, Mark, on his way home, happened to pass through this dense forest. When he glanced aside, he caught sight of a figure standing in the distance. From the clothing to the build, it bore an uncanny resemblance to the late Earl Charlie. The man had confessed to all his crimes earlier, but before his execution, he had one final wish: to see his daughter marry. Sheriff Mike, granting this request, allowed the man to attend the wedding. Yet, amidst the joyous celebration, the dead stepmother unexpectedly showed up to join the festivities. Strangely, the girl showed no trace of fear, acting as though nothing was amiss. Seizing the wedding as an opportunity, Mark asked the coroner to examine something for him: the candle found at the crime scene. His follow-up investigation revealed that the girl had somehow acquired it, reportedly spending a hefty sum of silver. The coroner's thorough inspection uncovered not only a high concentration of phosphorus, but also a mix of hallucinogenic drugs. Mark's prophetic senses kicked in again, vividly reconstructing the crime scene from that day. The true killer wasn't the stepmother's husband. It was the seemingly harmless little girl. Her father had taken the fall to secure her future happiness. With all the mysteries unraveled, Mark confronted the girl's father immediately. In front of everyone, he laid out everything he'd pieced together. With the truth exposed and no way to hide it, the girl braced herself for justice. But at that moment, her father lunged forward, grabbing Mark by the throat. Seeing his chance, the young man grabbed his wife's hand, ready to flee. Unbeknownst to the escaping couple, something far more terrifying awaited them ahead. The dense forest was pitch black at night, and the young man tripped over something in the dark. The girl had already boarded a getaway boat, and the one rowing was the young man, still trapped behind her. Oblivious to the eerie situation, she chattered on about why she'd killed her stepmother. But then, the young man across from her morphed into the stepmother's likeness. In life, she'd been a vicious shrew. In death, she was a ruthless spirit. With a piercing scream, the group finally pinpointed the girl's location. The bearded man swung his hammer with full force. Not only did it fail to cause any real damage, but it also enraged the already vicious stepmother even further. Countless evil spirits split off from her, instantly surrounding the group. A wave of chilling energy swept over them, lifting them uncontrollably into the air. Under the spirits' deliberate control, their bodies slammed repeatedly into the surrounding trees. As the spinning grew faster, they drifted higher and higher off the ground, teetering on the brink of being smashed to death. Fortunately, the coroner snapped back to his senses just in time. Grabbing the candle that had fallen to the ground, he lit it without hesitation. A surge of overwhelming dark power erupted within Mark. Though they couldn't make sense of what had happened, they were relieved to find themselves unharmed. But what they never could have anticipated was this. When they finally tracked down the little girl, she was already a cold, lifeless corpse. The one responsible for such a ruthless act was none other than the dreaded Death Knight. This was the legendary demon sealing chest, feared even in the demonic realm. It was said that Satan himself had once suffered a great loss at its hands. Unconvinced and curious, Mark reached out to investigate. Though the others around him had no idea what had happened, Mark knew all too well. His prophetic senses had struck again, and the disasters he'd witnessed were destined to unfold in the near future. Meanwhile, a sultry young woman was leisurely bathing, enjoying the scent of her soap. Suddenly, a disheveled spirit with wild hair emerged from the bathtub, its pitch-black eyes glaring right at her. As the entity loomed within arm's reach, the woman was too frightened to even breathe loudly. But the spirit merely warned her to stay away from Mark, claiming the two were about to hold a grand underworld wedding. Realizing the situation had spiraled beyond her understanding, Katusha immediately sought out Mark to ask about it. To spare her further harassment, Mark decided to confront Natasha himself. Yet when he ventured alone to the Lake of the Dead, he didn't notice that two vicious spirits had already set their sights on him. If they could trap Mark's soul at the lake's bottom, they'd break the curse left by the Dark Lord, exchanging 10,000 lost souls for a chance at life. Natasha, having caught wind of the plan, arrived just in time. With her formidable dark power, she drove off her companions, saving his life. When Mark was pulled to safety, guilt gnawed at him, making it hard to broach the subject of Katusha. Instead, he shifted the conversation to a strange dream he'd had. As his prophetic senses struck once more, Mark witnessed a bizarre scene. A flower, blazing like fire, dripped with sap, turning every pebble it touched into gold. Then, the flower transformed into a young girl. Merciless flames devoured her in an instant, and amidst the haze, he glimpsed a stony eye. Based on Mark's description of the flower, Natasha immediately identified it as the legendary Death Flower. She added that the stream he mentioned lay in a hollow behind the mountain. Determined to save the girl from his vision, Mark set off without delay. At the same time, a full moon was about to illuminate the land, marking the moment when the fabled Death Flower would reach full bloom. A young man stumbled upon it and, intrigued, plucked it from the ground. The instant its roots left the soil, the petals burst into dazzling colors. Startled, the young man tossed it aside, only for a miraculous sight to unfold. The pebbles in the river transformed into golden bricks, and everywhere the moonlight touched glowed with radiant gold. Thrilled, the young man grabbed one to take with him, but in the blink of an eye, it reverted to an ordinary stone. The sudden change left him dumbfounded. Across from him, a man seemed to have anticipated this. He dragged forward a hostage whose identity was unclear and declared that to preserve the gold permanently, it had to be soaked in the blood of a loved one. With that, he yanked off the white cloth covering the captive's head. When the young man saw her face, he froze in place. It was his fiancée. The young man couldn't resist the man's temptation in the end. He aimed the dagger at his beloved fiancée. Just as the girl's life hung in the balance, Mark arrived at the critical moment. As both the girl and the young man perished together, a sinister smile crept across the man's lips.